A few more will be popping in. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. John Gasparini. I'm a faculty member here in the Division of Applied Behavioral Sciences at the University of Baltimore, and I'm delighted to be kicking off our evening with a couple of remarks. First and foremost, I need to introduce the two people that are most responsible for working with Helen to be able to put this event together. First, we have Leonard Robinson, who is a politics, policy, and international affairs major at the University of Baltimore. He's editor-in-chief of The Sting, our campus news outlet, and has been selected for the New York Times 2021 Student Journalism Institute program. He's one of 46 students from across the country to be chosen to participate this year, and he'll be part of a cohort that represents over 38 colleges and universities nationwide. Leonard is a journalist passionate about telling accurate, in-depth, and powerful stories about the intersections of politics and business, which is certainly a fertile group of topics at this time. He's a staff writer at Consumers Bulletin. He's been writing for a long time. His stuff has appeared in the Business Insider, Baltimore Business Journal, Washington Blade, Washington Examiner, and the New Voices. I'd also like to introduce Regina Gray. Regina has served as the president of the University of Baltimore's chapter of Psy-Chi, our International Honor Society in Psychology, for the last 2 years, and she has really helped our chapter traverse the very difficult mission of maintaining an active Psy-Chi chapter during these really bad COVID times. Her lecture, Can COVID Catch Psy-Chi, will follow our speaker tonight. No, not really. But Regina really personifies the expression, if you want something done, ask a busy person to do it. For all of you who have sent me a lot of emails, I will be sending out the invitations for Psy-Chi this week so that hopefully we'll be building up the membership and giving everybody a chance to participate. That being said, Regina, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gasparini. So I just want to introduce Dr. Helen Fisher. We are so excited to have her here. She shared with us a little bit that she just got in from Florida in an early morning flight, 5 a.m. I think she said. And so we're very grateful that she is here to share her research with us. A little bit about her. Dr. Helen Fisher is a biological anthropologist, a senior research fellow at the Kinsey Institute. She has written 6 books on the evolution, biology, and psychology of human sexuality, monogamy, adultery, and divorce, gender differences in the brain, and the neurochemistry of romantic love and attachment. Human biologically based personality styles, why we fall in love with one person rather than another, hooking up, friends with benefits, living together, and other current trends, and the future of relationships. So she's going to be sharing that research with us today. And again, we're really grateful and thank you for coming to speak with us, Dr. Fisher.
Okay, well, thank you, John, and and thank you, Leonard, for putting this all together for me. But anyway, yeah, no, I wasn't supposed to get in at 5 a.m. I was supposed to get in at 11 p.m. last night. JFK airport was absolutely packed at 4:30 this morning. Anyway, the bottom line is I'm delighted to be here. I'm delighted that you're here. And I'm going to start talking about love. So bottom line is I study the brain. I and my colleagues have put over 100 people who were madly in love into a brain scanner. We're the first in the world to do that. A lot of people had thought that romantic love was just part of the supernatural. I couldn't believe that. I mean, fear is not part of the supernatural. Anger is not part of the supernatural. Why would this intense feeling of romantic love be part of the supernatural? So anyway, we did that. First group of people were happily in love, young and happily in love. The second were a group of people who had just been dumped, rejected in love. And the third were, of our basic studies, was a group of people in their 50s and 60s who were still madly in love with their long-term partner. They were married an average of 21 years, but they were still not just loving, but in love with a long-term partner. So it's possible to be in love long-term, but you got to pick the right person. So bottom line is the world got interested in our research. This is just a picture of two people by the New Yorker. You can't get two people in a functional MRI brain scanner. This is the machine we use, one of several actually, up at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. So I'm also Chief Science Advisor to the dating site Match.com. I've been that for now 16 years. And every year we study 5,000 Americans. We do not poll the Match members. This is an academic study of singles ages 18 to 71 plus around the country, every basic ethnic group, every background. And I want to tell you some of the most recent research about my feelings about actually how positive I am about today's relationships and where we're going in the future from all of these data. And I am certainly going to talk about millennials. If you're a millennial listening to this now, you are setting some trends that are going to bring, I think, almost prosperity to the future of the family. So anyway, then to begin, these are some of the questions I want to answer. Is technology killing love? Is monogamy natural? Why I am so optimistic about the future. What makes a happy partnership? Psychologists will say all kinds of things that make a happy partnership, all good. I'm very much for psychology. I'm just trying to add what the brain says, what we've evolved, what makes a happy partnership in terms of how the brain behaves. And last but not least, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another, which is my most recent research. So anyway, then to begin. Around the world, we love, we fall in love. People pine for love, they live for love, they kill for love, and they die for love. It's one of the most powerful brain systems the human animal has ever evolved. And we're saturated actually with the artifacts of this, not only myths and legends. I mean, every society has that, and every society has songs and dances about love. But of course, in our modern world, we've got symphonies, ballets, operas, theater, musicals, poetry, novels, sitcoms, TV series, cards and letters and therapists and holidays. We're absolutely saturated in this primal, basic human system called romantic love. So I decided that I should study this. And the first thing I did is I compared Americans with the Japanese. I wanted to know, I had to convince myself that around the world, we all love. And I ended up finding that you can fall in love at any age. In fact, the youngest person I ever met who was madly in love was 2.5. Every single time a particular little girl would come over to this little boy's house, he would just sort of sit next to her and stroke her hair and just gaze at her. And then after she left, his mother would tell me that he'd be depressed for about an hour and a half. This is not the sex system. It's a different brain system of romantic love. There's also a great deal of data that there's very little gender difference in this passion. In fact, I've got a lot of data that men fall in love faster than women do because they're so visual. Men fall in love more often than women do. Men want to move in sooner during a relationship. Men, in fact, have more intimate conversations with their wives or girlfriends than women do with their boyfriends or husbands, because women have their intimate conversations with their girlfriends, and men are 2.5 times more likely to kill themselves when a relationship is over. So for 40 years, I've been trying to tell the women's magazines that men love, and indeed they do. Also, there's a great deal of data now that gays and trans and everybody else falls in love just the way straights do. I'm not talking at this point about who you fall in love with or who you think you are. I'm talking about the basic feeling of intense romantic love. And you see it in gays, straights, trans, whatever, as well as heterosexual. It's a basic human brain system. And I and others have looked at over 200 societies, and everywhere in the world, people love. And so having discovered this, I began to think to myself, okay, if this is so universal, maybe I can look in the brain and see what goes on. So these are some of the traits. I had to figure out what romantic love was. And this is what happens when you fall in love. The first thing is somebody takes on what I call special meaning. Everything about them becomes special. The house that person lives on is different from every other house on the block. The car they drive is different from every other car in the parking lot. The songs they like, the music that they, everything about them becomes special. And then you focus on them. High energy, you can walk all night and talk till dawn. Euphoria when things are going well. Mood swings into horrible despair when they suddenly call you by the wrong name, or don't call, don't write, don't show up, ghost you, whatever. Real bodily reactions, I mean, butterflies in the stomach, weak knees, etc. A real emotional and physical dependence. You check your texts, you check your emails, you hang out in certain places, you are focused on this person. Real separation anxiety, when you're madly in love, you do not want to be separated from them. The next term is frustration attraction. I made up that term. There's psychological terms that are related to that. So, and what it is, and I now know what's going on in the brain. When they don't call, when they don't write, you want them even more. It's like going in to a shop looking for some chocolate and they don't have any chocolate, you just want the chocolate more. In the same way, when the brain wants something and you don't get it, you just want it more. Real possessiveness, jealousy, academic term, mate guarding, you guard this person, you guard this relationship. And of course, intense sexual desire. But the three main characteristics of romantic love is not that sexual desire. It's the craving for emotional union rather than physical union. You want them to call and to write and to ask you out and to tell you that they love you. The most important thing for me in putting these people in the machine was what I call intrusive thinking. You can't stop thinking about them. You wake up in the morning thinking about them, you go to bed thinking about them. And I would ask these people before, I'd put them in the machine, I'd say, what percentage of the day and evening do you think about this person? And a great many of them would say, I never stop thinking about him or her. Somebody is camping in your head. And last but not least, you're highly motivated to win that person. What people will do when they are in love is really astonishing. And last but not least, it's very difficult to control. It's a basic drive. It's like thirst and hunger. You just, Stendhal, the French writer, once said, he said, love is like a fever. It comes and goes quite independently of the will. And indeed, it does. So looking at all these traits, I began to think to myself, okay. And by the way, I read a lot of poetry because I think poetry is a great artifact of our human emotions. You see the same craving in ancient Egyptian poetry, ancient Chinese, Japanese poetry, et cetera, et cetera. Everywhere in the world, people love. So anyway, I looked at all of these traits, and everything that is here in red, bright red, is a trait that is linked with the dopamine system in the brain. The pale blue, bodily reactions, is probably linked with the norepinephrine system. Mate guarding is probably the serotonin system. I didn't think I could measure that, didn't succeed. And intrusive thinking, that obsessive thinking, is probably linked with dopamine and also norepinephrine. So I thought to myself, okay, if I look in the brain, maybe I can figure out which of these brain systems becomes active. So we began to put people in the machine. But before that, just a little backup here. I think the romantic love is one, I think we've been able to prove this, is one of three basic brain systems that evolved from mating and reproduction. One is the sex drive, organized, orchestrated largely by the testosterone system in both men and women. Romantic love, I've been able to prove, is linked with dopamine, norepinephrine, low levels of serotonin. I'll go into that very briefly. And the third brain system is attachment, linked with a different group of brain chemicals. And these three brain systems operate in any kind of ways. A lot of people think that they're phases. They're not phases. You can fall madly in love with somebody before you ever had sex with them. You can have sex with somebody who you're never going to fall in love with. You can feel deeply attached to somebody for years in college or at work or whatever, and then things happen, times change, and boom, you can fall in love with them. So I mean, you can even lie in bed at night and swing from feelings of intense attachment for one person and into feelings of intense romantic love for somebody else. So these three brain systems are often connected, actually. Actually, when you begin to have sex with somebody, you can trigger the brain circuitry for romantic love, and then you're off to the races. So bottom line is, casual sex is not casual. Unless you're so drunk you can't remember it, casual sex is not casual. It can trigger the brain circuitry for romantic love, and it can trigger the brain circuitry for deep feelings of attachment. So there are three different brain systems. They can operate in any combination. Most of us in a long-term good relationship really want all three. And in fact, I would even say, I don't have this slide in this thing because I didn't think I had enough time, but the bottom line is, if you really want to sustain a long-term partnership, I would certainly recommend that you keep all three of these brain systems active. But anyway, we're talking now about romantic love. Is technology killing love? It can't kill love. This is a basic brain system. In fact, this is one of our brain scanning scans of a particular individual. He's looking to the right, he or she, don't know. But on the outside of your head is your cortex, which reads your thinking. In the middle of the head is where the limbic system, where the emotions are generated. But way below that red line, is the brain region linked with drive, with craving, with focus, with motivation. And indeed, that's where we find the origins of romantic love. It's right at the top in the midbrain of this deep brain region linked with drive, in a little factory called the ventral tegmental area, and what it's called the VTA. That brain region, when you fall madly in love with somebody, that moment that you fall in love with somebody, it begins to produce dopamine, a natural stimulant, and send dopamine to many brain regions, giving you that obsessive thinking, the craving for the person, the high motivation, the butterflies in the stomach, all of the traits linked with intense romantic love. And indeed, that brain region, the ventral tegmental area, lies right next to the brain regions that orchestrate thirst and hunger. And at that moment, I finally realized thirst and hunger keep you alive today. Romantic love and drives you to form a partnership and send your DNA into tomorrow. It's a survival mechanism. In other words, thirst and hunger keep you alive today. Romantic love drives you to send your DNA into tomorrow. So no wonder it's a drive. So I think all three of these brain systems are survival mechanisms that evolved millions of years ago. Here's the yellow dot is the sex drive, very near to feelings of intense romantic love, but a totally different brain system. They can often go together, but a different brain system. And a little bit higher, that egg-shaped red thing is feelings of deep attachment. So having studied all this and looking at a lot of other things that I won't bother going into, I think that we've evolved the basic brain system for human intense romantic love, at least by the time our forebears were coming out of the trees of Africa over 4.4 million years ago. As a matter of fact, a lot of other animals love the same brain, a very similar brain system. You can see it in a rat, but they only sustain that deep attraction, that magnetism, that craving for about 30 seconds. Elephants hold on to it for about 5 days during the courtship process, etc. So different animals, other animals also fall in love. As a matter of fact, of all of my books, and thank you for mentioning them, my favorite chapter is in the book Why We Love, and it's chapter 2 about other animals also feeling this basic brain system that drives you to start the mating process. But anyway, in humanity, of course, you can be in love for a long period of time and to start the mating and reproducing process. I think there's a great deal of evidence now that it evolved over 4 million years ago with the evolution of monogamy. So people ask me all the time, is monogamy natural? Well, first of all, let's define what monogamy is. Mono means one, and gamy means spouse, one spouse. That's all it is. Has nothing to do with adultery. Everybody thinks that monogamy means fidelity. It does not, at least not to ethologists. It's just forming a partnership to raise your young. And indeed, 97% of mammals do not form a partnership to raise their young. Gorillas travel with a harem of females, so do a lot of other animals. Some are semi-solitary. They live separately and come together only to have sex and part again. We are astonishing in that we bother to pair up at all. And indeed we do. We're also adulterous. I could go into it, but actually don't have time. We could talk about it in the question and answer period. We also have a series of partnerships, serial pair bonding, etc. But we are a pair bonding species. And indeed, I've traveled a lot. I used to have a boyfriend who wanted to see every country in the world, and he would take me with him. So I've been to about 110 of them now. And one of them was in the highlands of New Guinea. We went to the highlands, which was a blessing for an anthropologist. Anyway, this guy's in his tuxedo. It's very manicured up there. And I was riding along in the most beat up van. I mean, you could see that, well, the road was just grass and dirt. But anyway, I could put my foot down right through the van. And I was sitting on an overturned sort of big canister, rusty old canister. Anyway, I was in the back with a group of locals. And one of them spoke English, and he had 3 wives. So I said to him, I said, how many wives would you like to have? And there was this long pause. And I thought to myself, is he going to say 5? Is he going to say 25? What is he going to say? And he looked at me and he said, none. And the reason is, it's a toothache. We were built to form partnerships. Now, we can talk about polyamory. I've studied it. When I ask on my Match.com questionnaire, how do you feel about polyamory, or poly meaning many loves, polyamory, many loves? And 68% of singles said fine, but only about 6% had ever done it. And they don't do it for terribly long. We are a pair bonding species. And technology can't kill it. It's like saying, can technology kill the anger system, or can technology kill the joy system?
Pricing, like, not California, but
I'm just hearing somebody talking. So anyway, but technology is certainly changing courtship. Courtship has always been changing. I mean, when I was growing up, we went parking because everybody had a car, and there were motels, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, courtship is changing. Courtship is always changing. And of all of the changes, I think, and you could all guess this as well as I could, the biggest new thing, and Match was the first to do it actually in 1995, is the rise of dating sites. But as I pointed out to the president of Match and an awful lot of other people, these are not dating sites. What they are is introducing sites. That's all they do, is introduce you. It's remarkable how many academics will say, oh, dating sites, they're going to ruin love. They can't ruin love. It's a brain system. And all they're doing really is introducing you to people. And what's astonishing to me about it is the growth of them. And I'm not astonished. I mean, I'm sort of glad. But anyway, the bottom line is our last data comes from 2020. We do this annual study. I do it with Match every year, 5,000 people, as I say, around the country. Last year, 40% of singles met their first date on the internet. Only 16% met through a friend, and only 2% met at a bar. As a matter of fact, a guy who's he was, I think, the president of the Bar and Restaurant Association, called me a couple years ago, and he said, Helen, people don't come in here anymore into our bars to meet each other. They come in with their cell phones to meet in a group and then get on Tinder or wherever they go. So the newest place to meet people is on the internet, and even newer. And I had predicted this, but I hadn't seen really how incredible it was. Is video chatting. What has happened during this pandemic is the rise of video chatting. If there's 2 T's in chatting, well, I may have spelled that wrong. But anyway, prior to this pandemic, about 6% of American singles did video chatting. They met on the internet and then they met in person. They did not do any video chatting between them. Now it's almost 1 out of 5 people who are doing video chatting. So I did a study of this last July, which was the height of this pandemic. And this is what we found because of video chatting. People are having much longer conversations. Oh, we got there at home, they're stuck at home, so I'm not surprised, but they're bothering to have longer conversations. They're having more meaningful conversations. They're having more honesty and transparency. There's more self-disclosure. There's good academic data that self-disclosure leads to intimacy. And this is men as well as women. Men are just as busy disclosing who they are and how they feel as women are on these video chats. They're less focused on looks, their own looks and the looks of whoever they're speaking with. And they're much more focused these days on finding somebody who is fully employed and financially stable. And what I and my friends at Match call is intentional dating. We are seeing a real shift. The bad boy and the bad girl are out, and people are very serious about this video chatting. What's interesting to me, and it's quite obvious actually, they're using it as a vetting process. You know, I mean, why go out and spend all that money before you have any idea who the person is? You know, sex is off the table too. I mean, when you met on the internet and then went straight out, I mean, it's awkward on a first date. You know, do I kiss them? Do I hold her hand? How do I handle it? Sex is off the table with video chatting. Money is off the table. You don't have to decide whether you're going to go to a fancy bar or just a coffee house, etc. Time is saved, etc. You don't have to get all dressed up, etc. So it's a very practical new a thing in the dating world, and it is leading to more transparency and looking for a long-term partner. And it's a vetting process. I mean, what we found is that 54% of singles met somebody, you know, was introduced to somebody online and then did the video chatting, and they decided they didn't want to go on a first date. And 66% of people like the person even more from the video chat, and suddenly wanted to go out with them. So bottom line is, I think that we're going to keep on doing the video chatting. It's practical. Sex is off the table. Money's off the table. You got more time to get to know somebody. And we're going to see fewer first dates because you're going to get rid of the ones you don't want before the first date. But the first dates are going to be much more relaxed and much more meaningful because you've already decided you like this person well enough to spend some money and some time with them. So we're going to be kissing fewer frogs, frankly. And I think we're going to get fewer first dates, but more meaningful first dates. As a matter of fact, in my study of the 5,000 Americans that we did last July, 50% of the, actually that was 1/5 of those people who actually went on a video date. And 50% of those people who went on to a video chatting before the first date actually fell in love during the video chat. And 56% said that they had felt some romantic chemistry. So the bottom line, you can fall in love in any kind of way. And video chatting, I do think, is the future. What's interesting to me about this is just that it's an escalation of what I call slow love. And this is what millennials are doing today. You know, in my day, I'm a boomer, people married very young. Women often married around age 20 or 21, men married around age 23 on average. These days, women are marrying at age 28 or 29, and men at age 30 or even 31. So what we're seeing and have seen long before this pandemic is an extension of what I call the pre-commitment stage of partnerships. Giving young, and the young are bringing this in, long period of time to get to know yourself, to get to know what you want, to get to know what you don't want, to practice at sex and love before you tie the knot. And the beauty of this is, well, this is what they're doing. Seems to be the main thing that people are doing. They're starting today is, no, we're friends, we're just friends, we're just friends. Then they move into friends with benefits. Over 50% of singles have had a friends with benefits relationship at least some point in their career. Then they have the official first date. So the official first date comes farther down in the dating process. And a lot of older people, and 35% of people who are on their official first date have already had sex with their partner because they've done the friends with benefits. They've decided they want to spend the time and money to have a date. And older people say, what? You have sex with a person before the date? But yes, friends with benefits, just friends, friends with benefits. Then you've decided, okay, I like the person enough to spend some time and with them. Then you move into living together, and then you finally tie the knot. So by the time these singles today, these millennials, walk down the aisle, they're gonna know they want this person. They're gonna think they can keep this person, and they think that this is the right person. And what's important to me about this is that it's ushering in this incredible trend. And this is, I look at the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations at 80 societies. I've looked at those that data from 1947 to 2011. And as it turns out, the longer you court and the later you marry, the more likely you are to stay together. So as these millennials, and if you're listening, you're one, thank you very much. These people want to know who they are. They don't want to catch feelings until they can handle it. And this long period of pre-commitment is going to lead down the road, I think, to more stable partnerships. Well, another thing that's interesting about this is very interesting data. It was, I looked, it's an article that came out of University of Chicago, and they found that people who met on the internet as opposed to off the internet, not just match, but on the internet as opposed to off the internet, were less likely to divorce. And I thought to myself, well, why would that be? Who cares whether you met somebody on the internet or at a museum or at lunch or at a football game, whatever, what difference would it make? And so I looked at 5,000 Americans, and as it turns out, I just compared those people who dated on the internet, not matched, but just anywhere on the internet, as opposed to off the internet. And as it turns out, people who met and dated on the internet as opposed to off the internet were more likely to be fully employed, more likely to be have higher education, and more likely to be looking for long-term commitment. So not only are we dating longer, leading to more stable partnerships, but we're meeting people in places where stability happens. So, everybody else is so horrified with what's going on, but the data shows that millennials are bringing in almost a new, actually, they're being called in I talked to a lot of journalists all over the world, and I was speaking to one in Russia, and she's calling millennials the new Victorians. And then I spoke to a woman journalist in Brazil, and she said they're calling millennials the new Victorians. These people are careful. Yeah, they're sleeping around. They're having their sex interviews, but they're basically a very careful, cautious generation who I think are going to bring in relative family stability for perhaps a couple decades or more. So what makes a happy partnership? I mean, I wanted to know that. So we looked at people in long-term partnerships, as I mentioned earlier. People in their 50s and 60s who reported that they were still madly in love with a long-term spouse. And we went to China and did it again. And there's all kinds of things that make a happy partnership. I mean, psychologists will say, and they're very smart about it, don't criticize, don't show contempt, don't, what are the others? Don't be defensive, that's important, don't be defensive. And don't stonewall, don't just shut down and not respond. All good, but this is what the brain says. This is what happens in the brain when you are in a long-term happy partnership. Other than the fact that you continue, the brain circuitry for romantic love continues, there's brain circuitry for attachment, there's brain circuitry for the sex drive, but these are the three basic brain regions linked with long-term happiness. Brain region linked with empathy, a brain region linked with controlling your own stress and your own emotions. Skip the drama, young. Everybody, skip the drama. It's not sexy. And last but not least, a brain region linked with what we call positive illusions, the ability to overlook what you don't like about somebody and focus on what you do. This is the 3 brain regions that remain active in a long-term happy partnership. So you got to pick the right person. And, it was 16 years ago, Match called me. I live in New York, and it was 2 days before Christmas. And the phone called, and was somebody from Match.com. And she said, we want to meet with you. Can you come in 2 days after Christmas? Well, I don't know if you're from New York, but the bottom line is nothing happens in New York 2 days before Christmas. But anyway, I said, sure, why not? Match.com. And I went in there, and I couldn't even figure out who was in the room. About 11 of them piled in. I thought, is this another think tank? Is there, I don't know if there are other, anyway, the bottom line was the CEO on down. And in the middle of the morning, he said, Helen, why do you fall in love with one person rather than another? And I said, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of cultural reasons. You do tend to fall in love. Timing is essential. The right person can sit on your lap and you won't notice them if you're madly in love with somebody else. Proximity, you fall in love with people who are around. We tend to fall in love with somebody from the same ethnic and socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence, good looks, and education, same religious and social values, same reproductive goals, whether they want to have children or not, social goals, economic goals. And certainly your childhood experiences play a role. I'm going to say that again. Definitely your childhood and adult experiences play a role. I'm not a biological determinist, but I'm trying to add the second half of the puzzle. And I began to think to myself, okay, you can walk into a room and everybody has the same general level of intelligence and good looks and education and religious and social values and economic and reproductive goals, and you don't fall in love with all of them. Why is that? Why do people say we have chemistry or we don't have chemistry? Is there have we evolved some basic biological systems that drive us to one person rather than another? So I began to look at basic biology. Now, there's a lot of things that scientists think that about 40 to 60% of who you are does come out of your biology. And one of the things that they would say is that intimacy, the feeling of intimacy, has a biological origin. And actually, men and women feel this a little differently. Women get intimacy from face-to-face talking. We swivel till we're face-to-face. We do what's called the anchoring gaze, and we talk. And I think that comes from millions of years of holding that baby in front of your face, cajoling it, reprimanding it, educating it with words. Men tend to get in intimacy. I took these pictures in Central Park, New York, out of side-by-side doing. As soon as this guy in the purple t-shirt looks up, the other guy will look away. For millions of years, I think this comes from sitting behind a bush on the grasslands of ancient Africa, trying to hit that buffalo in the head with a rock. You can't be yakking with your neighbors in order to do your job. And so the sexes have different feelings of what is intimacy. And there's the problem. He feels invaded, she feels evaded, and they're both trying to reach intimacy in their own way. So knowing a good deal about some genetics, I began to think to myself, okay, maybe I can look into brain physiology and understand what people say when they say we have chemistry. And so I began to look through brain systems. I mean, I've done it many times before, but this was looking for a new way. And there's all kinds of systems in the brain, thousands of them. But most of them keep the eyes blinking or the heart beating. They're not linked with any personality trait. But the more and more I looked, I found 4 brain systems that were linked, each one of them with a constellation of personality traits. and these are some, I won't go into this in any detail, but if you take cocaine, for example, you're driving up the dopamine and norepinephrine systems, and that's making you restless and energetic, etc. If you take ecstasy, it's driving up the serotonin system. That's why people feel this sense of cosmic union. If you give L-Dopa to Parkinson's patients, it drives up the dopamine system, and these people can become very creative. If with hormone injections, from transitioning from gay to, from male to female, you see different personality traits become more apparent. So the bottom line is, I spent a couple of years looking at all the medical and academic literature, looking for any trait at all linked with any biological system. And I found these four: the dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen system. Well, we've known for centuries that if you castrate a bull, it's going to become less aggressive. People take estrogen replacement and their linguistic skills go up. So the bottom line is, each one of these four basic brain systems, they're basic brain systems, if you see them in fish, is linked in people with a constellation of personality traits. So I began to name them. Explorer are people who are very high on the dopamine scale. Builder, the academic term is curious, energetic. I call them the builder. People who are very expressive of the serotonin scale. Main traits are cautious and social norm conforming. People who are very expressive of the testosterone system, I call the directors. I made up the terms. They're not even great terms, actually. I'd like to change them, but anyway, analytical, tough-minded. And people who are very high in the estrogen scale, I call them negotiators. They're pro-social and empathetic. So I'm going to go through these four. Anyway, I made a questionnaire to see where you land on all four systems. This is the big mistake of almost all personality tests today. They put you in one category or another. That's not the way the brain works. We are all a combination of all four. It's essential to remember. I, for example, am very high on the explorer scale. I've been to 110 countries, but I make my living being creative and writing books. Anyway, I'm also very high on the estrogen scale. I cry at a parade, it's ridiculous. But anyway, much lower on this serotonin, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is over 15 million people have now taken my questionnaire in 40 countries. You could take it in any one of my books. You could take it on the internet. You could take it on my websites, et cetera. But anyway, the bottom line is, this is only one individual. This particular individual showed more of the traits in the dopamine system, the bright yellow, and in the green, I call it tree hugger green, the estrogen traits, and fewer in the serotonin and the testosterone systems. Just one individual. As I say, I got 15 million of these things. And I decided what I would do, as I haven't created this questionnaire, I would put it first on chemistry.com, because that was the new site Match wanted me to work on, and then on Match. And watch who's naturally drawn to whom. When you have all these people you're filtering through, you'll click on some, you'll go out with some, and you will not go out with others. And I wanted to know, and I could see on chemistry.com, okay, this person's high on dopamine. Do they pick other dopamine people like themselves? Do they pick other people, et cetera, et cetera? I had a hypothesis, actually it was half right and half wrong. So anyway, I'm gonna go through these four different brain systems and give you the basic traits of it and what I found. People are very high on the dopamine system, I call explorers. Plato calls them artisans. Plato found all four of these personalities. A lot of people, Myers and Briggs have figured it out, but they did it intuitively. All I've done really is do it chemically and scientifically. Anyway, those people are very high on the dopamine scale. These are the traits in the dopamine system. People who are high on the dopamine system, the pathway in the dopamine system in the brain, express these traits. The novelty seeking, risk taking, it's called sensation seeking. They're curious. They have the most interests. They actually make the most money. They lose the most money because they're such risk takers. They're energetic and restless. They're exploring. They're not all jumping off mountains. They might be people who go to the opera, the theater, and read poetry, or love music, et cetera, et cetera. But they are curious and energetic, very enthusiastic, optimistic, independent, self-reliant, impulsive, spontaneously generous. These are the ones that will walk in the bar and buy everybody a drink. Mentally flexible and open-minded. They can change their mind rapidly. But the main characteristic is idea generation. This is the academic term linked with the dopamine system, verbal and numeric creativity. And I call it creative intelligence. Peter Thiel is a good example, co-founder of PayPal, real entrepreneur, real early endorser of Bitcoins, loved radical new ideas, very much of an individual who was also high on the testosterone system. And you can see it in his face. The heavy brow ridges, the high zygomatic arch, the cheekbone, the square jaw, the high forehead's all built by testosterone. So he would say, he hasn't taken my question here, but I would say that he's very high on the dopamine and the testosterone scales, and probably much lower on the others. Lang Lang, the concert pianist, flat, dazzling, flair, charisma, daredevil, extremes. He was wild on the piano when I saw him, and certainly Gloria Steinem. Very different people, very different backgrounds, very different contributions to society, but the same basic brain system driven by dopamine, that curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic, mentally flexible style of thinking and behaving. And they're drawn to people like themselves. They want somebody who's just as curious, just as spontaneous, just as creative as themselves. I've got data on 28,000, almost 29,000 people. People are very high on the serotonin scale. I call the builder. Plato called them the guardian, much better term. Had I known that about Plato's terms, I would have borrowed them. I would have acknowledged Plato. But anyway, I call them pillars of society. These people are conforming. They're social norm conforming. They like the familiar. They're cautious. They're not scared, but they're harm avoidant. They're calm. This is why you take a Prozac or Paxil or Lexapro or one of those things. They calm you down. They're self-controlled, modest. They like plans and routines and schedules. They're orderly and persistent. They can sustain their attention. They're concrete, literal, detailed thinkers. And I'll never forget a moment, one of the most important thinking moments in my career. I had written a book on this, Why Him, Why Her, and I happened to be in Seattle. I was being interviewed by some journalist from their major newspaper. And it was in the morning in this coffee shop, and almost immediately I had the uncomfortable feeling that this woman couldn't stand me. And of course I became more and more enthusiastic and flamboyant about my ideas, because that's who I am. And I knew that it was a failure, that she could not stand me or my ideas. So anyway, the following morning I was going to the airport, and I suddenly realized this woman was a builder. She needed the details. She was a concrete thinker. Why did I give her the huge ideas? Why didn't I start with every single detail? The Chromax alpha, the ventral tegmental area, detail, and I could have perhaps won her over. And I thought at that moment, I suddenly realized, I don't believe in the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. I believe in the platinum rule. Do unto others as they would have done unto themselves, and you can win. So anyway, they have more social, they're more close friends. If you, as I say, you take Prozac or Paxil, you end up having more close friends. They want to belong. They respect authority. They follow the rules. Religiosity is in the serotonin system. Now, not everybody who's high serotonin is religious, but it's in the serotonin system. We know the basis of religiosity, and they're loyal. If you do take the questionnaire, I can't remember quite what the question, but it was something like this: would you rather have loyal friends or interesting friends? Well, we all want loyal friends, and we all want interesting friends, but this type of person cannot tolerate unloyal friends. And the other three types cannot tolerate uninteresting friends. It's a mathematically, every time I did the math, I found that. So those are the basic traits linked with the serotonin system in the brain. Mike Pence, I think, is an absolutely perfect example. You know, he called himself a principled conservative or a common sense conservative. He didn't call himself a forward thinking or a mentally flexible or a energetic or whatever. Principled. The kinds of words that people, I did a whole word study, the kinds of words you use really do reflect who you are. I really wasn't surprised that he was that loyal to Trump the whole time, except when he was trying to follow the rules of the election system. But other than that, a very loyal man, and certainly an evangelical Christian and a high on nationalism. Hu Jintao, the former president of China, very much the same. Technocrat, manager. These people are good at managing, consensus building, disliked extravagance, that modesty, etc. And certainly Queen Elizabeth. I mean, there was no way she was going to figure out Diana. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of her children and grandchildren she regarded as, you know, loose cannons on the deck. I think she's a very high serotonin builder. And this kind of person goes for people like themselves. Just as dopamine, explorers go for more dopamine, people like themselves. Serotonin goes for people who are cautious, conventional, traditional, follow the rules, respect authority, want a partner like themselves. The third and the fourth, testosterone and estrogen, go for their opposite. Plato called them warriors. I call them a director. I prefer warriors. They've got what I call a strategic intelligence. They're analytical, logical. They really have good spatial skills. It's called rule-based systems. They're very good at math, engineering, computers, music. Music is very spatial. Not to me, I swing to the beat, but I'm low in testosterone. But actually, as I've gotten older after menopause, I can see the structure of music better. Einstein played his violin late into the night, and then he was stopped to jot down various theories about the universe. It's very structural. They're very experimental. I call it strategic intelligence, exacting, daring, skeptical. They're competitive. If you inject testosterone into a lizard or a dove or a monkey, they'll begin to fight for rank. These people are very rank oriented. It's called dominance matching. They'll attack and they expect you to attack back. And if you don't attack back, they think you're weak. And in fact, I remember one night with me, I was in New York, it was a black tie dinner, and I was standing there with four men. And one of them was from the Wall Street Journal. And he was taking me to the cleaners. I mean, he was really dumping. I mean, and the other three were watching. And I got smaller and smaller and smaller. There's two basic postural messages in the animal community: looking little and looking big. When you're little, you're curling your shoulders, you're knocking your knees, you're hanging your head. And looking big, you put your shoulders back, thrust out your chest, instead of lobsters do it, fish do it, dogs do it. They'll hang their tail between their legs if they're trying to look big. Anyway, the bottom line is I was looking smaller and smaller, and he was carrying on. And suddenly something happened in my brain, and I turned around to this guy, and I said something that was vicious. I don't remember what it was, but it was also funny. All four of them went like this. It's called the barred tooth display. Chimpanzees do it. You do it when you're really nervous. And I thought to myself, oh, if he thought like a woman, he'll never forget this insult. If he thinks like a man, I've done my dominance matching. I've not been weak. And he has respected me. Long silence. All of a sudden he threw up his hands. He started to laugh and he started to laugh. And that man has respected me to this day. So, you know, anyway, it's called dominance matching. They're also emotionally contained, generally self-disciplined. Fairness is in the testosterone system. I was writing about this recently. What is fair? But it's structural. It's rank. It's in the testosterone system. And they're direct. These are the ones that scream, get to the point. Steve Jobs is a perfect example. And look at his face, the heavy brow ridges, the high cheekbones, the very square jaw, the high forehead is all built by fetal testosterone in the womb. Also very self-disciplined, brash, demanding, brutally honest, exacting, etc. Very high. And look what he built that we're all enjoying today. Margaret Thatcher, they called her the Iron Lady, and Hillary Clinton. I think she's high testosterone. She's tough-minded, was going to join the Marines. Most interesting to me is I saw on this thing when she was asked why she was attracted to Bill, she said, he wasn't afraid of me. Now, I wouldn't have thought of that, but I'm not high testosterone. These people go for their opposite. High testosterone goes for high estrogen, the fourth of these four styles. I call them negotiators. Plato called them philosopher kings. They see the big picture. It comes from the fact they're holistic thinking, contextual long-term thinkers. It comes biologically from the fact that fetal estrogen builds more connections between the two hemispheres. And there's some data that it builds more connections between the back and the front of the brain as well. Whereas testosterone compartmentalizes these. They're both good ways of thinking. We need both of them, but this is built by estrogen in the womb, giving mostly women, some men who are high estrogen. I think Obama's high estrogen, actually. I think Clinton's high estrogen. Anyway, the bottom line is they gives them what I call web thinking, or this holistic long-term thinking. They tend to be more imaginative and mentally flexible because they can think of a lot of different ways of doing things. What they call executive social skills. They're good at reading posture, gesture, tone of voice, language, etc. Intuitive, it's called theory of mind. They can get into your head and figure out what you're thinking. Empathetic, nurturing, and trusting. And that was very important. Anthropologists have not really known, why would being trusting have evolved? I mean, you trust the wrong person and you have a problem. But I began to see these people can probably afford to be trusting because they can watch your posture, gesture, tone of voice. They can see you in the context. They can imagine who you are, and they can get into your head and figure it out. So you can begin to see how a group of traits can evolve together in one system. They're very introspective too. Everything has meaning, just the way you slice the lemon to make the drinks at night. You know, we're not having sex tonight. Everything has meaning for these people. And they seek harmony. They want to be agreeable. They'll never attack you to your face. They'll stab you in your back, but they're not going to do it into your face. They have what I call they're emotionally expressive, and what I call diplomatic intelligence. So Oprah is a good example, I think. Bill Clinton, I think, is a great example. I mean, you know, we've always been wondering when we were going to have our first female president. I think we've had our first female president in Bill Clinton. In his very long autobiography, he says it's important to have a synthesizing mind. Very good talker. The whole world knows he can't stop talking, and almost coined the term, I feel your pain, his compassion, etc. And you can see it in his face. It's a round face and a shorter forehead, and it's not that heavy jaw. And certainly Charles Darwin. He was certainly an explorer. You know, he went around the world for years and connected every living thing. Very much of the negotiator as well as the explorer. And these people also go for their opposite. So now I'll just give you an example of me. I'm very high at dopamine, as I've mentioned. And my new husband, at my age, I'm over 70, just got married, is also high dopamine. He's a journalist. He's written for many years for the New York Times, now writes in other places. And been around the world many times doing reporting. And so we're both high dopamine. That really works very well. He's very high testosterone and I'm very high estrogen. That also is a natural connection. But he's higher on serotonin. He follows the rules. I don't know, I follow the rules of the road. I don't want to be roadkill. But if a rule doesn't make sense to me, I don't generally pay any attention to it. And one night we were going to the movies, a couple of years ago. And I said, sweetheart, do you have any water in your backpack? He said, yeah, I have water in my backpack. I said, oh, great, we can drink it in the movie house. And he said to me, you can't bring food or drink into a movie house. You've got to buy it at the concession stand. It hadn't dawned on me. He follows the rules. And what's nice about that is I think he's going to follow the rules of marriage and also be faithful to me. So what's important here, and the only reason I say this story is it's personal, so it's real, but get to know who somebody is. You can begin to appreciate them. It's not all about yourself. He follows the rules, not because of his upbringing, but because it's who he is. I don't want to insult anybody, but the bottom line is we are saturated today in psychology. Everything seems to be your mother's fault, your childhood fault, your experiences. I just would like to say there's a second half of this puzzle. There are some ways in which we are just who we are. And it's pretty easy to just do a workaround. We bought water at the concession stand. And I think hoping that my work can give people a broader understanding of the pitfalls as well as the joys of a partnership, so that you can understand who you are better and who somebody else is better. And when that moment comes to do a workaround, you can do that. So anyway, I think these 4 systems evolved. I think they evolved a long time ago in the brain. And I'm an anthropologist, and for millions of years we lived in these little hunting and gathering societies. And anthropologists think that about 25 people were in a band. And about 10 or 12 were children and adolescents, and the other 10 or 12 were grown-ups. And so they're all going, let's take it 300,000 years ago, the modern brain had evolved. And they're going over the hill and they see some mushrooms that they've never seen before. You can't have all the explorers saying, let's try the mushrooms. You're gonna have some builders who say, it's not in our tradition to try these mushrooms. You're gonna have some directors, the high testosterone, who say, well, let's do an experiment and feed the mushrooms to the dog. And you gotta have some high estrogen negotiators who say, let's sit down and pool our data about these mushrooms. The bottom line is, I'm writing my next book now actually on how you do this in building a team, and how you innovate, who leaders are, etc. And all 4 styles of thinking and behaving are going to innovate. All 4 are going to lead, but they're going to lead differently. But the bottom line is we were built to put these together, to use all 4 styles of thinking and behaving at work and in family and in love. So I'm just going to end up with a couple things here. You don't care about this, but I care profoundly about this. What we did is we did 2 experiments. In order to get into the major neuroscience publications, you got to do the same experiment twice. And before we put people in the machine studying something entirely different, I said, oh, well, would you please just take my questionnaire, which they did. And both things. And as it turns out, people who scored very high on my questionnaire, it's called the Fisher Temperament Inventory, on my personality test, showed more activity in a whole dopamine pathway in the brain. Those who scored high on my serotonin test showed more activity in a tiny little brain region linked with social norm conformity, a basic trait in the dopamine system. And so thus and such with testosterone and estrogen. The bottom line is, this is the only questionnaire in the world, to my knowledge, that started from physiology of the brain to make a questionnaire, and then went on to brain scanning to prove that the questionnaire is actually measuring what it says it's measuring. Every other questionnaire started from linguistic studies to make a questionnaire, and you can't go back to linguistic studies to prove it. Now, they do a lot with factor analysis, et cetera, but this is the reason that I think this works. So we started a company called a Neurocolor, and we're going into the business world. I won't go into that, but if you want to take a look at it more, we did a 2nd generation personality questionnaire. I think it's even better. It's based on the whole stuff, but we measure some other things as well. And then we give you a 22-page profile of who you are, how you deal with risk, how you deal with schedules, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, the bottom line is, I'll close with this. A story, actually. We're wired for love, of course. And I think we're wired for these styles of thinking and behaving. But anyway, here's the story. I was in Japan with Match, and they were starting Match Japan, bringing that data service to the Japanese. And my job for 1 week was to talk to journalists, explain the questionnaire, explain what, et cetera. And then came the last night, and I said, well, what am I supposed to do tonight? My little wonderful handler said, well, Helen, we're going to have a little mixer. She said, we've invited the first 400 people who signed up with Match Japan to come to an evening together. So I thought, well, okay, well, I get there and the place looked like the White House. I mean, it was this enormous building, big columns, marble floors at the outside. Anyway, big statues and flower arrangements 6 feet tall, and a huge ballroom, mobbed with people. And as it turns out, every one of these singles, before they came into the building, had to take my personality questionnaire, which they did. And people who were, their primary traits were those of dopamine, the explorers, were wearing a bright yellow rubber band around their wrist. Those who scored highest on my serotonin scale, the builder, wore a royal blue rubber band around their wrist. Those who scored highest on what I call power tie red, high testosterone, wore a red one, and those who scored highest on my estrogen scale wore a green one. And so anyway, the moment came, and I was told that what I had to do, they wheeled out huge tables, wheeling out this big table, 4 of them, with the bottom layer of a wedding cake on each of these 4 tables. And the bottom layer was about 2 feet by 2 feet, bottom layer of a wedding cake. And all around it was sorts of decorations, edible decorations. And everybody in the room was told to go to a specific corner of the ballroom and decorate the cake. And what I was supposed to do was, I don't know, talk about these cakes. I said, oh my God, I don't know anything about cakes. So anyway, the crowd parted, and here was the first cake that I saw. It was the high estrogen people, men and women, mostly women. That cake was smiling at me. It was intimate. It was charming. It was saying, let's be friends. It was emotional. I don't know if you want it on your wedding, but it's a charming, let's be friends, high estrogen type of wedding cake. Then I went to the high serotonin cake, and the crowd parted, and this is what I saw. It's much more formal, much more traditional, much more organized. Look at the bottom and the front. One kiwi, one cherry, one kiwi, one cherry, kiwi. Detailed, organized, plush, traditional wedding cakes. Probably the kind of person you want to decorate your wedding cake. Then I saw the high testosterone cake. There's no emotion in that cake. There's no emotion at all. But they decorated around the cake on the platter. They thought outside the box. A very high testosterone. So last I go to the high dopamine explorer cake. Crowd parts, first thing I see is 3 men pitching from like, I don't know, 6 feet away, fruit at the cake. And then when they saw me coming, another guy grabbed some flowers out of a vase, having nothing to do with the decoration of the cake, and plunged it into the middle of the cake. And this is what I saw. Basically chaos. And the bottom line, the point here is people are different. They think differently. And I don't believe in the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. I believe in the platinum rule. Treat them as they want to be treated. Understand who they are and treat them. You don't have to change what you got to say. Say it in a way that they can hear you and you can win. Thank you.
I got to unmute so you can at least hear one hand clapping. Helen, that was truly great, except for the pictures of the cake. Since I've been on a keto diet for 4 months, I'm
Oh, how you doing?
I lost like 15 pounds, but it's not about me tonight. We truly appreciate everything that you said, and thank you so much for allowing us to record this for our UB community to watch again at another time if they weren't able to make it tonight. But right now, I want to turn it over to Regina, who has been capturing questions for you, and let's see what the students want to know.
Yeah, again, thank you so much. That was so fascinating, everything you shared. So we had quite a few questions come in. I don't know if we will get to all of them, but as you mentioned your book, Why Him, Why Her? I'm sure that there are quite a few answers in that book as well. And The Sting, which is UB's newspaper, is going to be giving out 5 copies. Yep. To the whoever is lucky enough to get chosen, who has attended today. So to start out, with the questions, I'm just going to start with the last thing you talked about, and that was the 4 different types. Someone asked, is it possible for these levels to change throughout your life? For instance, in your 20s, if you were a heavy dopamine, and by the time you were 50, you were a high serotonin. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And it's a very important question. I should probably put that even in the speech, but the bottom line is, if you're very high dopamine, it's built into the brain. This is genetic. Genes don't change. Environment changes, but genes don't change. So, there is epigenetics, but the bottom line is, by and large, genes don't do a lot of changing. And so let's say you're very high dopamine and you're 4 years old. Yeah, you're interested in dolls, you're interested in the bugs in the park, you're interested in how the trees bloom, et cetera, et cetera. Then you get to be 14, and sure enough, you're no longer interested in that, you're interested in boys or girls or whatever. Then you get to be age 30, you're not interested in that anymore, you've got a wife or husband, and now you want to be interested in travel. And then you get into your 50s or 60s, and suddenly you're interested in poetry and literature and this and that. So the basic curiosity doesn't change, but what you're curious about does change. And I do think that some impulsivity goes down, so there is some change. Dopamine levels do go down as you get older, but curiosity, which is something I think built into the system, doesn't really change. What you're curious about is going to change. But I do think that impulsivity does change. I just was thinking about myself. I mean, during graduate school, I literally one summer in Boulder, Colorado, went to the Greyhound bus station, got on the bus with $35, and for 36 hours, I rode by myself to San Francisco. No job, didn't know a prison. Would I do that today? Never. So I do think that impulsivity goes down. I do think that some parts of these brain systems go down, but a high dopamine person, I don't think they're ever going to turn into high serotonin. Now, I did have a woman come up to me after a speech. She said, Helen, I've always been a very high dopamine. I do black diamond skiing. I travel all the time. And then I had a child. Now I want schedules. I'm cautious. I'm this and that. Who am I? And I said, well, your environment is going to require that you behave differently, but it's more tiring. You can act out of character, but it's tiring. And I didn't say this to her, but I thought to myself, you're going to be a great mother. You're going to be cautious and scheduling all this, but you probably won't do it quite as naturally as somebody who does that naturally. And as soon as that baby goes off to college, you're going to be back to skiing your black diamonds, et cetera. So I do think that the vast majority of who we are does not change. Now, for example, estrogen goes down, testosterone goes down, and you'll see a man who's very ambitious as a young man and not spending a lot of time with his children. Then he gets older, and now he's spending a lot of time with his grandchildren. And you'll see middle-aged women become more assertive. I mean, very often grandmothers say it like it is, the way a young girl wouldn't. She'd be polite and worry about what people thought, whereas the grandma. So yes, I do think that there is some change. But can you make a person who's mathematical unmathematical? Can you make a person who's curious uncurious? We can beat them every time they ask a question, and times will change. But the bottom line is, I do think that there is some real stability to who you are. We can change to some extent, but it's tiring.
Thank you for that answer. So along the same lines, we have someone asked if all 4 of these systems or personality types have certain advantages and disadvantages, do you think certain social environments will produce different relative proportions of each in the population over time? And if so, how much is epigenetic versus genetic?
Somebody's educated. Somebody's really at University of Baltimore. I'm going to remember this one. That's a question that I don't get generally asked, and I would love to ask. Okay, there's 2 parts of it, and I'm not good at remembering both of it. Remember to ask me about the epigenetics. But in the beginning, does the social environment sort of select for certain styles of thinking and behavior? I think that's, by the way, I don't use the word type, because a type puts you in one thing rather than another. I'm going to try and change that in the lexicon, because it's styles of thing. Anyway, bottom line is, so I got data on 40 countries. And in Japan, when I saw this, I had maybe 100,000 people take the questionnaire. A huge number of the Japanese are builders. They're high serotonin. And even in Japan, that's that whole concept of, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. So it's a society that is very traditional, conventional, follows the rules, respects authority. And I do think that people who are very high on the dopamine scale, creative, curious, spontaneous, energetic, more impulsive, leave. They'll come to America where that style of thinking, behaving is rewarded. And what's interesting, in America, we're very creative, but we're not very process oriented. The Japanese have not been creative. They didn't create a lot of those automobiles, but they make them. They're builders, they're managers, they're schedules, they're planners, they're organized, they're traditional. And so you can even see on the realm of personality, different societies taking on personality styles, because the majority of the people in that culture have that style. And the ones that don't have that style leave. And I've really become very interested in migration patterns because of that. And the people that get on boats to come to America and try and get in this place, they might be poor, but they're not stupid. Those are the ones that are the more high explorers type. They are bringing to America creativity, curiosity, spontaneity, et cetera, et cetera. So I've really become very interested in these patterns. Now, for example, I was talking with this CEO, international CEO, major company, a couple of weeks ago, and the Danish are also very high serotonin. And he said to me, he said, no wonder I can't deal with the Danes. He says, I come up with a brand new, very exciting idea, and all they want to know is the details. I can't do it. Whereas he's, so the bottom line is, yes, very smart question. That whole societies get cultural patterns that then become national patterns, and people will migrate out. That's the first part, epigenetics. So for those who don't know what epigenetics is, it's basically the acquiring well, it's the most important thing that's happened in my lifetime. It's the changing of genes during your lifetime that then get passed on to the next generation. So now there's constantly, your genes are changing. I mean, somebody who's got, cancer, the genes are changing. All kinds of times, some genes will change, but they're not passed to the next generation necessarily. Epigenetics is the passing on a genetic change within your cultural milieu in your body that is then passed on to your children. And there's more and more data that this can happen. And that really speeds up evolution. And me, for example, I'm an identical twin. I have an identical twin sister. And when I had read about it, by age 5, apparently about 50 epigenetic changes had occurred. And then during the course of your life, more epigenetic changes occur. Now, I didn't have any children. She has a daughter. One thing that's interesting, I mean, this is just an example. She's very allergic to wool. I'm not at all allergic to wool. And I once read about it, and I think it was some sort of antibiotic that she took when she was a baby or sick, that made an epigenetic change in her that I don't have. And I think it is, I don't know if it's epigenetic. In fact, I should know whether her daughter is allergic to wool. But the bottom line is, we do, during the course of our life, have epigenetic changes. And it's the most interesting field in my lifetime, because it is, anthropologists, psychologists, sociologists, biologists have long thought that the only way that the body can change is just by mutation. It's a very slow process, but epigenetic changes can be rapid. And it's a budding field that is absolutely fascinating. So thank you, whoever asked that question. You're an educated creature.
That was asked by one of our professors, Dr. Frederick.
Oh, okay. It sounded like somebody who knew what they were talking about. I hope you liked it. I like the answer.
A follow-up to that, and to the whole, thank you for answering that. It was fascinating to go into depth about the epigenetics. And a follow-up just to the general idea is, do you see a variation in these styles across geographical regions in the United States?
Yes, I even have a whole map. I took it out of my presentation. And maybe we shouldn't go back to the presentation because I don't want to lose you. But the bottom, yes, I did. In all the big cities, there's more dopamine, more explorers. And people go to the big cities for the excitement. They go for the theater and the arts and the music and the novel restaurants. And I looked in 10 cities, and everywhere there's, in all 10 cities, there was more high dopamine, knowledge-seeking, risk-taking, curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic, high dopamine explorers. Serotonin is all through the middle of America. No wonder they're Republican. They're cautious, they're more traditional. It's as if these are the two ends of the same system. I call it the stay-go system. Serotonin is the cautious stay, traditional, conventional, follow the rules, respect. And the estrogen and the dopamine is the go system. And they all balance each other out. And I can even see, when Republicans and Democrats or conservatives and liberals fight, I almost see it on the genetic level of the serotonin system and the dopamine system, working with each other. High testosterone, as you could guess, it's all around Washington, D.C., where there's rank, where there's power. There's a lot of testosterone in Las Vegas and Nevada. And what is gambling but a spatial thing? There's an awful lot of testosterone in Alaska. What is Alaska but pioneer people shooting the animals? That's very spatial. And there's high estrogen in the Northeast and the Northwest, where I'm told there are more colleges. There's more women who go to college, et cetera. College is for people who have got verbal skills and writing skills. These are the skills that are really certainly not in the chemistry department, but in a lot of the social sciences, et cetera. So yes, you definitely see a variation. There's people who live in the Midwest, they don't want to be in New York. And there's people in New York, they don't want to be in the Midwest. And what's interesting to me is not only in countries, but in regions in America, there's a gene in the dopamine system called the DRD47 repeat allele. It's gene linked with risk-taking and novelty-seeking. I'd ask you to guess, but nobody ever guesses it right, where that gene is most frequent in the world. And it is most frequent in the Amazon River Basin. Now, you could either say it's there because those were the kind of people who had the balls to walk over the bridge from Asia and get in there. Or you could say those are the only kind of people that can live there. So the other ones, the cautious ones, either never went or got there and died out because it was just too frightening. It's not a place for caution. So yes, you not only see this in world populations, but you see it in, you also see it in professions. You're going to see much more testosterone, people gravitating to testosterone, to engineering, math, women as well as men, but there's more men. You probably see more estrogen. I haven't looked at that because I haven't had the data for it, in the helping professions, in childhood education. I would guess that an awful lot of journalists who go around the world are very high dopamine. It takes some courage to go up the Congo River with a camera, for God's sakes. So these are, yes, so anyway, that's the answer.
Thank you. I think it's great to hear about all this stuff and helping us learn how to relate to other people too, when we think about, what is their style. I'm noticing the time. I know,
Lots of styles.
yeah. I know we only have you for a few more minutes, but I did want to jump back to a question about what you started talking about in the beginning and how technology is affecting relationships. And someone was wondering, how long does video chatting sustain a relationship before it no longer supports relationship building? Is there a time by when relationships should move to in-person?
It's going to vary from one person to another, but one of the things that we already, I don't know the answer because video chatting hasn't been around that long, but this is going to be so individual. I mean, don't forget, we're still in this pandemic. I mean, some people want to get to know everything about somebody before they go out in person, and other people are so goddamn sick of this stuff that they'd like to go out yesterday. So, and meet in person. So I think that's going to be very, very individual. But one thing that we do know before the pandemic, that Match knows, that all the rest of them knows, is the longer you stay on the internet, the less likely you are to ever meet in person. So that's one of the beauties of Tinder, that you get out and meet the person as soon as possible. I mean, video chatting is great. It's a way of vetting the person so that you don't go out too soon in that. But the bottom line is you get a whole lot more information in person than you do even in a video chat. So what I would say is to try and go out as soon as you're comfortable doing it.
Okay, good to know. And that question was from one of our other professors, Dr. Sharon Glazer.
Can I add one more thing about it? I'd like to give a little bit of advice for people, seeing as how you would be interested in this. This technology is very new. And so people don't know how to use it. There's nothing wrong with the technology. They just don't know how to use it, like all new technology. And one of the biggest problems with internet introducing is that we binge. And we started going out and meeting all these kinds of people, looking for the perfect person. The problem is that's not the way the brain works. It's other work showing that the brain can deal with about between 5 and 9 options. And after that, it just gets deluged. It's called, oh my goodness, I've gotten so tired. I can't remember. The paradox of choice or cognitive overload. And so one of the things I say is if you're going to use the internet, and I certainly recommend you do, after you've met 9 people, not just met either video chatting or met in person, after you've met, so you see them, you hear their voice, you know something about them. After you've met 9 people, stop. Get off the site if you're serious about meeting somebody and get to know at least one of those people better. The more you get to, good psychologist shows that the more you get to know somebody, the more you like them, the more you think that they are like you. So don't deluge yourself. Don't go on these binges because you're working against your own best efforts. The second thing I would say is think of reasons to say yes. We have this enormous brain region linked with negativity bias. We are built to remember the negative, which is an evolutionary strategy. I mean, for millions of years, it was not adaptive to forget who didn't like you. It's nice to remember who does like you, but if you don't remember who doesn't like you, you could die. So the brain immediately remembers the negative. For example, you go to a party, everybody says, oh, you look great, you know, this, that, next thing. And one person says, did you gain a little weight? What are you? You go home, that's the only thing you remember. We remember the negative. And so in these video chats or just going out and meeting somebody, you know, he likes cats, you like dogs, forget about it. Overlook it. Think of what you, unless it's completely obvious that you can't stand it, it doesn't work at all, you know. So don't binge after you met 9 people, stop, get to know one of them better, and focus on the positive instead of the negative.
That's just such great advice that I think so many people need to hear. We get stuck in that, you know, wanting it to be perfect.
Yeah.
For
good reasons. I mean, if you're going to have babies with somebody, you want it perfect, as perfect as you can get, that's for sure.
Right, right. Sometimes you got to let go of the list, though.
You got to get like, and a lot of people do. We study this at Match. We look at what you ask, not me, but the people there. You know, they will look at what you say you want, and then they watch out who you end up going out with. It's not always the same.
Yeah, it's true. All right, so I'm going to ask one final question because we don't want to keep you on here forever. Someone asked how much of the quote unquote long love of millennials is motivated by economics versus changing cultural norms, or are they linked?
It's got to be both. It really just has to be both. I mean, I think the changing economic things is really rocking everybody's boat. I mean, we really are using this video chatting as vetting. They really are having longer conversations, more honest, more transparent, looking for a long-term situation. And I do think that that started before the pandemic. I think because of all the chaos in the world. And I think an awful lot of millennials have parents who've divorced and seen the chaos there, and maybe even more than once. And it's a cautious generation to begin with. And a generation that wants to prepare themselves. It was so interesting. Before the pandemic, I asked, you know, about 40% of millennials want self-acceptance before they catch feelings. Now that's noble. In my day, we weren't looking for we wanted to be our best. We weren't looking for self-acceptance. We're very psychologized. And 1/3 of them, of millennials, want to get their career going and be somewhat financially stable before they catch feelings. It's a very serious, they're not getting married first and then working it all out as in the past. And then I think the pandemic really blew everybody's mind. And they really see, my God, I've been stuck in this place for over a year. You know, a lot of them, about 50% of millennials during the pandemic, lost contact with somebody that was just beginning or just couldn't find anybody. And about 50% picked up on somebody, you know, that they might not have picked up on. But they're looking for companionship. So I think that the trend, I think that economics started it, but there's also other things. I mean, you know, women don't have to marry young anymore. They're making their own careers. I mean, in former generations, a woman's only career path was to marry well. They weren't as educated. They might not even inherit money. Their career path was to marry well. Now a woman's career path is to make her own money. And in fact, I took this out of my presentation, but it's a very important point to me. All of our conversation tonight about technology and how that's changing things is changing how we court. It's changing how we meet people. But the real world trend, the biggest world trend, has nothing to do with technology, except it's a spinoff from that, is women piling into the job market in cultures around the world. That's what's changing how we love. And we are moving actually forward to the kinds of partnerships that we had a million years ago. I mean, a million years ago, women commuted to work to gather their fruits and vegetables, They came home with over 50% of the evening meal. The double income family was the rule. And both men and women stuck in a bad relationship could leave because they could financially do it. Women are more interesting than they have been in 10,000 years because they're educated. And so now what they're doing, instead of marrying very young, they're getting their education, they're getting their financial stability, and then they're choosing for companionship, not need.
That's really encouraging. Thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your research and your advice and thoughts with us. We really appreciate it. This was really great.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Leonard, for meeting that night. And thank you, John, for our conversation. And thanks to everybody who joined us.
And thank Jared for helping us through the technology.
Jared's number one.
Thank you, Jared.